Hello. Thanks for coming tonight and welcome to the McMullen Family Conservation Center. My name is Jennifer Jay. I'm the Director of Communications and Engagement for the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy. We're especially grateful to our many partners who made this Priority Landscape Learning Series one of so much incredible knowledge, including the Botanic Garden, Interlochen Public Radio, the Nature Conservancy, Mary Parr, a fire ecologist with the Michigan Natural Features Inventory, and our presenters tonight from the Little River Band of Ottawa Indians and the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians. This is the last presentation of the learning series that happens in this building, but it's going to be followed by two incredible hikes, guided hikes at our featured priority property, which is Perch Lake. Perch Lake will be an addition to the Upper Manistee Headwaters Nature Preserve. Barb Heflin, who just snuck in the back, is here. If you want to know anything about those hikes or anything about that property, Barb is the person to talk to after tonight's presentation. That unique 342-acre wilderness is located within and contributes to the health of the North Branch of the Manistee River and its watershed. And it's located very near to where the Arctic grayling were just reintroduced not very many days ago. I am personally really excited to know that the Conservancy is working diligently to protect a property that's going to impact the water quality that might help the grayling population thrive there once again. So thank you again for coming. Miigwech to our presenters, and I'll introduce you to Archie Martel from the Little River Band.
Thank you. Okay, we have, how long do we have? Hour and a half? Yeah, just kind of a quick overview here. I'm just kind of go over some of the history and how we got to this point. You know, what happened with grayling in the past, the partnership, you know, a little bit of the cultural importance of grayling to the tribal nations here. Then we'll kind of skip into some of the more current actions that we've taken with actually introducing eggs into our incubators. And I'll introduce Alex Onkos, fishery biologist for Little River Band at that point. Oh, I'm sorry. Is that better? Okay. I thought I was speaking loud enough. So yeah, just kind of go over some of the history and whatnot, and then we'll get into kind of what's been happening here recently. If this works. Oh, wrong way. So, no, I need my glasses. So yeah, the historical presence of Arctic grayling were the predominant submodid in lower Michigan cold water streams in the lower peninsula here. Only native in Michigan and Montana in the lower 48. They were not believed to be native to the upper peninsula. They were, I believe, they were introduced up there. They were extirpated from our lower Michigan streams in 1936. There is this sign-in grayling for the Arctic grayling at the old hatchery that's there. If you're ever over there, you can check that out. Oh, wrong button again. Okay. So what led to the extirpation of Arctic grayling in Michigan waters? There's three main causes that we believe happened. Habitat degradation and fragmentation, unregulated harvest, and introduction of competitors and predators. So, I mean, this is what the Manistee River looked like during the logging era. It's pretty dramatic on the changes to the system that happened there. You know, they basically hauled all the logs to the river, used the banks to roll them in, and then floated those downstreams to the mills and stuff. So that just scoured out all the habitat. They removed any natural woody debris from these systems so they get the logs down there. So they basically just devastated the habitat for these fish and other species within the river systems here. Also, fragmentation. Hodenpyle Dam on the Manistee River was started construction in 1925. So that cut off a bunch of that river system. And then some of the things that we deal with currently, perched culverts, other impediments for aquatic habitat, organism movement within these systems. Unregulated harvest. There was a lot of people, once it got kind of out there, that there was a great fishery up here. Charles Halleck published the Fishing Tourist, which I actually found on Google Books online. It was from, 1873. So if you're ever looking for it, it's out there. And there's I think 4 or 6 pages on just fishing grayling in Michigan. So once that got out there, people were interested in coming up here and catching fish. Unregulated sport harvest. There was also commercial harvest to feed the logging camps and also move these fish down to the bigger cities for food. And then I just found this here today when I was kind of going over the presentation. It kind of shows the rail system, which everybody used to get up to these areas to go fishing. So yeah, basically connected right from the East Coast over towards Chicago and all the way up to the tip of the mitt. So it was pretty easy access for people to get up into these areas that otherwise would have been pretty difficult. And then as we move on from that into introduction of competitors and predators like brown trout, brook trout, and rainbow trout into these systems, the state of Michigan, or the conservation department back then, had the Wolverine rail car that they used to plant different species into the systems as the rail cars would drive by. So those 3 factors are kind of what we believe led to the extirpation of grayling within the lower peninsula of Michigan. There has been some past efforts to reestablish or rehabilitate grayling, starting back in the late 1800s. They were transplanting fish around, moving around, trying to figure out what they could do. Early 1900s, there was some egg and fry and some yearlings stocked. The latest effort by the state of Michigan was in 1987 through about 91. They planted yearlings in. They used just traditional hatchery techniques. They'd raise them in a hatchery, they'd take them out and plant them, and the fish just kind of disappeared. Montana saw the same thing in their efforts when they tried to use traditional hatchery techniques. When they put them in, they just disappeared. They didn't know where they belonged. So we'll talk a little bit about the remote site incubators in a little bit here about, why now and what is different. Well, we've done a lot of restoration of our riverine stream habitat systems, through Conservation Resource Alliance, Tip of the Mitt, the tribes, the state of Michigan. Everybody's been working on restoration efforts to our aquatic systems. So we've come a long way since the old logging era in rehabilitating to systems that are somewhat close to natural. They'll never be what they were, but they're good producers of trout and cold water systems right now. So we've restored the habitat. Montana had success with the remote site incubators. These fish were able to imprint on their natal waters so that they knew that was home. So they didn't start just straying all over the place. From what I understand, grayling like to move around, but they also need to know where home base is so that they can come back there and spawn and reproduce. So we addressed the imprinting by using, Montana's success in their rehabilitation program out there. And then genetic stock, when we were looking at what stocks were suitable, I was hoping Montana stock would have been the predominant one, but it was determined that they were a little bit too truncated, a little too inbred. So we ended up going to Alaska to actually get the brood stock to come down here for the reintroduction efforts. Little River became interested in kind of looking at this possibility of reintroducing grayling to Michigan back around 2010. We did a little bit of investigation in some local streams, just looking at habitat and fish community and to see what would be suitable as compared to other areas that do have grayling in them. So once we got to a point where can't do this alone. Some discussion started with the Michigan DNR about forming a partnership. So in 2016, we got Johnson got his people together with our people, and we tightened the screw up, and we had our first partnership meeting in August 18th of 2016, which I was totally overwhelmed with. There was probably 80 to 100 different people there representing just about every different agency, nonprofit organization within the area that was interested in Arctic grayling. So from there, we moved into kind of developing how this partnership was going to work. The main thing that we wanted to stress was that we wanted to restore a self-sustaining population. We don't want to rely on hatchery fish for the life of having these fish in our waters. We want them to be able to do their own thing, reproduce without us having to interfere with them. So there was a few, MAGI, the Michigan Arctic Grayling Initiative, groups formed: management, production, research, education, and outreach. So each one of those groups kind of had their own tasks to kind of come together to get to the point where we could actually get the eggs and have those available for reintroducing. Little River developed Nemegos, stewardship plan for the Arctic grayling that kind of guides us internally on how we're implementing this project for Little River. As a group, we came up with the Michigan Arctic Grayling Initiative plan. So that kind of works as the MAGI guiding document there. We did have support from tribal leadership, to reclaim what was lost and get these fish back into the water. Through the initiative, we have had a stream nomination process. So we're looking for community involvement for these streams. They needed to be nominated by a local government or municipality with local support for those. So I believe right now these are the rivers that we had nominated: the Manistee, the Maple, the Boardman, Jordan, and the Asable. And then also considerations as the broodstock ages out of where we're going to put those. Some of the broodstock, there's 3 lakes that we put some in. The closest one to here was Pine Lake down by Wellston. We were able to get I think a little over 1,000 fish there. So if anybody's looking to go potentially catch a grayling in Michigan, that's where they're at right now. I haven't had any success, so if you do, please let me know. Taking my son out there a couple times now, and no luck there. What's that? A little over 1,000. So restoring these fish back to Michigan waters is important to the tribes to restore their cultural identity and their heritage. It's something that the tribes relied on. It was mostly a food fish available in the spring for them that they relied on, but they've lost that. We've all lost that. But so reconnecting with this species, with the heritage, and that is important to the tribes. So restoring and reconnecting individuals, tribal members, non-tribal members, to these fish back into our ecosystem is kind of one of our goals here. Touch a little bit on the Upper Manistee River, which is important to the Little River Band of Ottawa Indians, since the Manistee River runs directly through the Little River's ancestral reservation areas. It was one of the great Arctic grayling streams in lower Michigan here. One thing unique about the Upper Manistee River is it's got over 70 miles of unfragmented contiguous streams system up there. So you got the main stem, you got all these feeders creeks and streams. So these grayling have quite a bit of area to potentially move through up there in that way. And with Tippy Dam and Hoden Pile in there, we don't have to worry about Great Lake species moving up there and disturbing them either, like salmon or steelhead or whatnot. So that's kind of blocked off. The one potential negative that we see in most of the streams that we've looked at as potential candidates is the competitors and the predators. Brown trout, I like to call them kind of the garbage can of the trout world because they eat anything. And you know, we've added brown trout everywhere. We've added brook trout everywhere. So we were looking for areas that had low densities of brook trout or brown trout specifically, and we know that grayling do well, okay with brook trout, especially in Montana. I believe they're mostly bug eater, insect eaters. They'll probably take smaller fry or whatnot, but. So it got us to May 12th, 2025. We finally had brood stock that were mature enough to start producing eggs, viable eggs. And we had a ceremony up there. Little Traverse Bay Band brought a drum and did the prayer for that ceremony. And Little Traverse, Grand Traverse, and Little River all got eggs to start the introduction. So May 12th was the day that it happened. And with that, I will switch over to Alex Oncas, who is Little River Band's fisheries biologist, dealing with our Arctic Grayling program, to kind of go over where we were, looking at the grayling, and yours is where? Right there?
Yep.
All right. Zoom into where's presentation mode?
Would you consider the Upper Manistee watershed to be like Holden Pile up?
Yeah, Holden Pile up. You see presentation mode on there? Oh, it's down there? Okay. Yeah, I think if we hold questions to the end, then we'll have a good discussion on back and forth.
Thank you all for coming. It's great to see big audience here. As Archie mentioned, my name is Alex Oncas. I'm the inland fisheries biologist with the Little River Band. Going to kind of switch gears here a little bit, talk about the work that we've done through the years, and we're kind of at a turning point where the rubber meets the road for the reintroduction. So talk about what we've done in the last few weeks to get eggs in the water and hatch them out. I've been in the field for like the last month, so this is a big change of pace for me, but I kind of feel like I'm still outside, so this is nice. So this is kind of a repeat of one of Archie's slides, but I just wanted to emphasize that, you know, our focus is the Manistee River. At this point, it is the Upper Manistee. I think Archie touched on all these points. But to answer your question, I got a little polygon here that kind of shows, you know, our area of interest. So that's, I don't know if my pointer's working, but pretty much from the Holden Pile Reservoir all the way up to the headwaters, close to Mansalona Road, and all those tributaries in between. So there's a lot of water up there for these grayling to move around in. A lot of tributaries that we had to look into in terms of habitat suitability, water temperature, fish community, things like that. So I think it's really important to reiterate, you know, the overall mission statement of the initiative, and that's to restore self-sustaining populations of Arctic grayling within the species' historic range in Michigan. But as I said before, there's a lot of water to look into. So where exactly are habitat conditions right? Where is the fish community right? Where do we have the right water temperatures? And that's what, you know, we started doing back in 2010, moving up into 2016, continuing on until, you know, essentially this year, and also moving forward is just to continue to explore the Upper Manistee watershed as much as we can. So, you know, this is a complicated endeavor. We're working towards bringing back a native species that hasn't been here for almost 100 years. But I'd say the factors that are most crucial for the survival and reproduction of Arctic grayling in Michigan include water temperature, in-stream habitat, and the overall fish community of an area. So I'll get into those in a little bit more detail in the coming slides here. So when I started up back in, I guess that was almost 3 years ago now, one of the things that I really wanted to do was establish a long-term water temperature monitoring program for the Manistee River and also tributaries of interest. And this all stemmed from the fact that we really want to reintroduce Arctic grayling where water temperatures are suitable. They're a cold water species. They seem to prefer water temperatures between about 50 and 64 degrees Fahrenheit. So cold water, similar to brook trout. And this is a fairly easy thing to do. We can deploy these water temperature loggers. They're pretty cheap. We can buy tons of them at a time, deploy them. They'll record at 1 hour intervals, and we'll download the data off of those seasonally. And if we put these in enough places, in the right places, have enough coverage within the watershed, we can identify areas where water temperatures might be too warm, and we can also use the data to identify potential thermal refuges. The Upper Manistee gets a lot of groundwater input. That water is usually pretty stable year-round, so in the warmer months, they might go to where there's more concentrated groundwater input, and they might also do that in the winter too, because they won't experience those temperature extremes if there's a lot of groundwater in the area. And I usually present a slide on water temperature data, but no, it's not the most exciting thing. I have it at the end of presentation if we have any questions on it. So for the sake of time, I'll go through that one. So this map here shows the spatial distribution of those water temperature loggers in the Upper Manistee watershed. We have pretty good coverage in the main stem and also have loggers in tributaries of interest. So I think at this point we have about 30 of those loggers out. So along with the water temperature monitoring that we do, there's also been a lot of work to look at in-stream habitat. Habitat can be, a pretty complicated topic, but I'd say, a basic definition of habitat is that it includes the physical and biological factors crucial for the survival and reproduction of a species. And this is of interest to us because low quality habitat can limit survival and natural reproduction, which is a bad thing. And if we introduce these fish where habitat isn't favorable, then success is unlikely. And we care about this for all life stages of Arctic grayling. We want to know where the habitat is right for spawning. We want to know where it's right for early life stages. And one thing I really like to emphasize is that habitat diversity is also important. If you spent time on streams and rivers in Michigan, you know they're not uniform. Things can vary a lot from bend to bend. This sequence of pictures here is all sites in the North Branch Manistee River that are probably within a mile of each other. And you can see how different habitat conditions are in these areas. So that picture on the left, that's, a lot of gravel, submerged vegetation, a lot of woody debris. That's probably somewhere where we'd expect adult Arctic grayling to spawn. This picture in the middle is a fairly large beaver dam complex that's just downstream from that picture on the left. Beaver dam complexes are usually pretty low water velocities, a lot of silt, a lot of woody debris. That's something, that's an area where I'd imagine that early life stage Arctic grayling will do pretty well. And then this picture on the right is that typical sandy run you see in a lot of Michigan streams. So when we go out and do these in-stream habitat assessments, we'll bring a clipboard, measuring tape, we'll do surveys and make observations of substrate, so whether we see sand, silt, gravel on the bottom. We'll make note of dominant mesohabitat, so whether we see pools, riffles, or bruns. We'll measure and quantify things like woody debris coverage, aquatic vegetation coverage, and there's going to be a quiz sheet in the back for this table, so when we're done, grab one. But I just wanted to show all the things we're taking into account because we know that the habitat requirements are different for each life stage of Arctic grayling. And we can ultimately use these data that we collect to rank sites and compare them to each other to figure out how well we think each site will perform for each life stage of Arctic grayling. And then we can use this information to inform where we put the incubators. We want the incubators to be somewhere where adult grayling can come back to spawn successfully, since these fish imprint. And we also want to put the incubators where there's probably good early life stage habitat right downstream. So this map here shows where we've done those habitat surveys over the years. At this point, we've done well over 50 of them, in the main stem and also tributaries of interest. And then this map here kind of shows those data in action. So this map shows where we've done habitat surveys, and then it's color-coded. So this map is looking at egg and spawning life stage suitability, and a green dot is good, red dot's bad. So wherever you see a green dot is somewhere where we expect spawning Arctic grayling to have the habitat that they need to successfully spawn. So that's probably somewhere where we'd be interested in putting the incubators. Yellow dots are marginal, and red is just not good at all. But what's worth noting here is you see a heck of a lot more green dots than red dots. So we know that we have suitable spawning habitat for adult Arctic grayling within the Manistee River watershed. So along with water temperature monitoring and fish community surveys, habitat assessments, we've also done quite a few fish community surveys through the years. We do these to determine which predators are in an area and what their densities are. And this is important because once those young grayling emerge from the incubators, they're going to be immediately exposed to predators. So we want to make sure that those young grayling have good neighbors, essentially, that aren't just going to eat them all. So this is important because we know that competition and predation from non-native salmonids is of concern. Of course, we have a lot of brown trout here, a lot of brook trout, and we know that brown trout are mean predators, like Archie said, and so it makes them fun to fish for. These interactions are more complex than just big brown trout eating little Arctic grayling. Nicole Watson did her dissertation work at Michigan State, and she found that even early life stage, like very young brown trout, can affect the growth and survivorship of early life stage Arctic grayling. So we wanted to know where there's naturally low brown trout populations and really hone in on those areas for the reintroduction effort. So to do these surveys, we'll go out backpack electrofishing. It's a lot of fun to go fishing when you have the power of electricity on your side. We conduct these surveys seasonally. We really want to know what the fish community is like when we expect adult Arctic grayling to be spawning. That's in early spring. And we also want to know what predators are around when the early life stage Arctic grayling are developing. So we continued those surveys through the summer into the fall. And when we go out and do these surveys, we'll walk upstream, shock fish along the way, net them, collect them, and then make a little workup station on the side of the river. And all those fish will be measured, identified, and we'll use those data to determine the densities of potential predators within an area. These are a lot of fun to do. You get your hands on a lot of fish that are just hidden in plain sight. So it's usually, a pretty fun outing. So it's kind of a simplified look at what these data look like in action. That aerial photo on the left is a site in the North Branch Manistee River that's become kind of one of our long-term monitoring sites. It's a pretty cool area. There's a lot of habitat diversity there. It's a 500-foot transect, and this is what one electrofishing outing looked like for us there. You'll notice we caught a number of different species. We mostly caught brook trout, which is a good thing. We know grayling and brook trout can get along pretty well. I think you'd be pretty hard-pressed to find a stream in Michigan that can support grayling that doesn't have brook trout nowadays. But what's important to notice here is we didn't catch a single brown trout. So there are areas with naturally low brown trout populations. So we talked a lot about remote site incubators, and I think it's worth mentioning again, having a whole slide about it, because these allow the eggs to hatch in the natal stream water, and that allows that vital imprinting stage to occur. We didn't know that in the past with previous reintroduction efforts, and these have proven to be a useful tool for Arctic grayling restoration in Montana. Back in 2018, 2019, the Little River Band and partners did some RSI testing to see how they'd work in tributaries of the Manistee River. Our rivers here are a lot different than rivers in Montana. We have a lot of sand, pretty low gradients, so we wanted to make sure that they would work here. Rainbow trout eggs were used as a surrogate. Rainbow trout are spring spawners, just like Arctic grayling, so wanted to make sure environmental conditions were similar to when we expect Arctic grayling to spawn. And these tests were ultimately successful, did achieve adequate flow rates within the RSIs, and did successfully hatch rainbow trout.
Could you explain how Arctic grayling does imprint on a certain
as far as I know, it's olfactory imprinting. So it is smell. I don't know if anybody really knows the details of that mechanism. I definitely can't speak to it. I don't know if any of you guys could at a later time, but from what I understand, it is smell. So moving on to kind of where we're at now. So we did water temperature monitoring work, a lot of habitat assessments, fish community surveys, and ultimately all those data were combined, and the North Branch Manistee River was selected for initial reintroduction efforts because it met the criteria that the partnership found to be most important. And this is kind of the exciting part of giving this talk, because usually I talk about what we're going to do in the future, but now I can talk about what we're doing now. Back in April, we installed remote site incubators in the North Branch Manistee River. We did this at 3 sites, all pretty close to M72 or the Flowing Wells area, if you know where that's at. And we used 3 different incubator designs. This is a literal don't put all your eggs in one basket situation, so we wanted to have all of our bases covered, and that resulted in 12 RSIs total. That red blip on the map there shows the North Branch and the Manistee River relative to the watershed as a whole. So moving into some pictures, this is what the remote site incubators look like in action. This picture in the upper right shows our bigger incubators. We wanted to make sure we had enough egg handling capacity for a lot of eggs moving into the future. You essentially run a bunch of 2-inch conduit upstream to generate enough head pressure that water naturally goes into the bottom of the incubator up through a mesh egg tray. I have an incubator here if you all want to see it at the end. Up through an egg tray, and then there's just 2 outlet pipes at the top of the incubator that once the fry hatch, they can move out into the river. And then this picture on the lower right is just a different incubator design. That's a floating basket incubator that some partners came up with and did some testing on up in the UP. So egg stocking, we ended up having 3 egg stocking events this year. The first one was on May 12th, following that ceremony that Archie talked about. This event, we got about 171,000 eggs. The next one happened about a week later. We got 150,000 eggs. And then the last one happened on the 27th, and we got about 70,000 eggs. So close to 400,000 eggs total just for the North Branch Manistee River. When you get those eggs from a hatchery, only a certain percent are viable. It's just part of doing hatchery work. It seems like that's pretty normal for Arctic grayling specifically. It seems like they are about 50% viable. So using that estimate, you know, some batches were better than others. It seems like we hatched well over 200,000 eggs successfully. We didn't have any big mortality events during the incubation period, so that was great to see. And we had some pretty warm temperatures back in like mid-May, so those ones hatched out pretty quickly, but it seemed like on average we were getting the bulk of the eggs hatched out in about 3 to 5 days. This picture's cool. I tried to put more videos in here, but the format of the video file just didn't want to work with PowerPoint. But you can see in that picture all the little black dots. Those are the actual eyes of the embryo within the egg. And in videos, you can see them moving around within the egg. It's really cool. So this is what they look like after they hatch. You know, this picture on the left was one of the floating basket incubators. You can see how many fry are in there. And this picture on the right was one of our more traditional incubator designs. These pictures, you can still see the yolk sac on the majority of the fry, which they'll use for a couple days before they actually start feeding. We had great hatches. It was awesome to be out there and experience it and see them moving into the system, especially because I did get one video to work. And it's probably a little hard to see depending on where you're at, but those are all little Arctic grayling fry. So there were days where, I wonder if I can get that to play again. There were days that I would go out and there would be thousands of Arctic grayling in the stream adjacent to the incubators, which was pretty incredible. So I think we'll touch on this in a little bit as a group, so I think I'll skip through this future step slides. But Yep. If you'd rather email me because you have any questions or you want my contact information, you can get it here if you just want to take a quick snapshot with your phone. And with that, I'll pass it on to Nick. Oh, yeah.
We'll pull up the contact information back up at the end here. Sorry about that. Alrighty. Well, thank you, Alex and Archie. You guys make my job really easy. You guys have covered pretty much all the background information. So if some of this sounds like repetition, that's intentional. The tribes have all worked really hard to collaborate together. And it's really cool to see the tribes all work together in such a way that, work from one stream translates so well to another stream. It just means that, the Michigan DNR is also a big part of this reintroduction efforts, but the tribes are, the grassroots efforts driving behind it. So it's really neat to see how we're all helping out one another just to bring back the species that's so important and critical to the state. So without further ado, I'll talk a little bit about how the Arctic Grayling reintroduction efforts are playing out in the Boardman Ottaway River. There's some other folks at GTB that have helped in all aspects of this presentation. Dan and Brett are here, and Sean is the guy who's in charge of our sturgeon and Arctic Grayling rearing facility. So I'm sure he would love to be here as well, but he's got some fish to feed. Before we get started, I would just like to acknowledge that the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, abbreviated as GTB, or Kitchiwewadong, represents the modern lineage of the Anishinaabe people, the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi, keepers of the sacred scrolls, keepers of the sacred fire, and of the trade. They're the original caretakers and protectors of the lands that we now know as Traverse City and this area as well. So before the Boardman name was attached to the Boardman Ottaway River, the locals just called it the Ottaway, right? So we don't have pictures of it going back that far, but these are some of the more, the first pictures that we could see. So this is the sawmill here downtown where Traverse City is, the Hanalei sawmill. And then just upstream of that would have been where the Boardman Dam was recently taken out. So that's just kind of a picture of what happened shortly after humans settled the area, and also coincidentally why Arctic grayling are no longer in these streams today. But before logging took place, Arctic grayling and brook trout were the dominant salmonid species that were swimming around. There are reports of them just being thick as thieves in the spring. You'd look at them spawning in the spring, and it was just, ribbons of silver all throughout the area. Just a really, really cool imagery in some of those reports. I wish I had pictures, but we've got black and white pictures of, what happened shortly after, unfortunately. In the area, logging peaked in the 1850s to the 1880s in the upper watershed, and the grayling precipitously declined. This graphic here just kind of shows as you go out through time. This is from Vincent in 1962, a publication from the University of Michigan. But as you can see, in 1855, there was reports of 1/2 trout, which at that time were brook trout because brown trout weren't introduced at that time, 1/2 grayling. And then as you can see through the 60s, 70s, the grayling and trout kind of flip-flopped. And then by the 60s and the 80s, grayling are pretty much gone out of the area just as quickly as all the logs were taken out, just as Archie had all those pictures of the rollaway areas as well. So really quick change in the landscape and then also in the community for the fish. So a lot has changed in 100 years and for the better. Grand Valley State University was able to collaborate with Grand Traverse Band. They were able to fund a graduate student, and I was lucky enough to snag that position. So that's part of the reason why I'm standing before you guys here today. But we wanted to ask this question of where can Arctic grayling succeed in the Boardman Ottaway River? So this study map here, Traverse City is just kind of, you can see at the top corner there at the base of Old Mission, but we're not too far from it, so not too much explanation needed. But a lot of what made this possible is the dam removals on the Boardman Ottaway River. The tribe and Brett Fessel here, it was a big part of getting that together. So these dam removals are some of the largest in the lower 48, second only to some of the really large dam removals that were done really on the West Coast in California and Oregon and Washington area. So some of this state-of-the-art really process allowed this river to flow freely, much like it did, over 100 years ago before all these modifications were done. So similar to what Little River did, Grand Traverse was able to do habitat and fish surveys. We did 2 per tributary. We focused on the upper tributaries as those were going to be the least impacted by humans. Also kind of the best chance we guessed for Arctic grayling to succeed. A lot of those tributaries have the habitat that a lot of the eggs, fry, and juveniles need for those early life stages. And once the fish grow up a little bit, they're able to move around and really find the areas that they like. But as Alex mentioned and Archie mentioned, it's really important for those young fish to be able to have a safe space for them, to grow up, so to speak, and kind of get their feet under them if they had feet, right? So in all of these 16 sites, we did temperature monitoring, very similar to what Alex did with Little River. But then we also have these yellow circles here where we also did temperature monitoring in addition to those habitat surveys. So we had 27 locations in total throughout the Boardman Ottaway watershed where we're monitoring temperature at an hourly basis. Now, Alex spared you guys from the temperature data slide, but I'm not going to. You guys don't get off that easily. So these are a picture of our temperature loggers here, but it's very simple, right? So I just kind of put little red circles where temperatures got a little bit warm in the summer. So I will mention the summer of 2020 and 2021 were particularly hot and dry summers. We didn't get hardly any rain, and we were keeping track of that as well. But these red circles are a little bit exaggerated, like by Taylor Creek, and then let's see, over by Kalkaska, there's the old mill pond that was really warming up the section there, but it cooled off quite quickly as well due to all the groundwater in the region. So overall, really great water temperatures. Almost all of our average temperatures for July and August, which are the warmest portions of the summer there, were between 55 and 64 degrees Fahrenheit, which is really what the grayling prefer and really what you like to see. Yep. Sure thing. Let's see here. Okay. Isn't 19 Mile might be a smaller tributary. That's not one of the ones that's named on the. Is it over by 22 or is it lower down in the watershed?
I was hoping you could show me where.
We'd have to get the map out because yeah.
Right there,
Okay.
that's an area that has old growth forest,
Okay.
heavily shaded, and I thought it might be particularly good
Gotcha.
for keeping water temperatures cold.
Yeah, definitely the 22 Creek and the Carpenter Creek areas were some of the coldest water temperatures. I think there were some that didn't even get above like 60, even in, when the air temperatures were, 80, 90 degrees. But I do love talking water temperature, so see me after. So similar to Little River, we also did habitat assessments. This was kind of the methodology was agreed upon by folks in Montana, folks from Michigan DNR, from the tribes, so people that knew a lot about grayling and a lot about Michigan as well. So what we did is, as Alex kind of mentioned, we did stream bank assessments. We looked at the vegetation both in stream and then the forest surrounding the stream. We looked at depth, flow, substrate types. We did pebble counts, large woody debris surveys. We measured discharge, and then we also looked at microhabitats within the stream. So kind of that all boils down to, and I guess I would also like to mention, so each of those take maybe half a day each. Yeah, myself and other folks from GTB and GVSU spent a lot of time out on the stream for my master's project, but we're just really happy to collaborate and get that large chunk of field work done. So how this boils down, our color scale is a little bit different between me and Alex. So we're using this this map here. So anything that's red is 60 to 70% suitable, and then you have kind of your stoplight. So yellow's better, green's even better, and then blue is the 90 to 100. Just for the sake of time, I boiled them all down to the all life stages. So that's including everything from egg to adults. I could flip through these slides if you guys are interested as well. And there were some spots that scored even in the 90 to 100% aisle as well for some of the individual life stages. But all of the sites were suitable, so they were greater than 60% suitable, which is kind of the cutoff that was used for this work in the publication that kind of corresponds with it. And then 14 of the 16 sites scored 70% or better in the Boardman, which was really, really exciting. The next kind of piece of the puzzle, so to speak, was the fish community assessment. So this was just a nice overhead shot of one of our spring electrofishing assessments. And as Alex said, it really is like if you hear that there's electrofishing in the field schedule, you're like, okay, like I'm going to make sure I'm there. Like you're going to volunteer to go out because really is a lot of fun. But it's also just a really good way of identifying what fish are there and what fish aren't. So what we did is we did mark recapture surveys. So we'd go to the same stream one day, do a little notch on some of their fins, come back the next day and look for how many notches we had, and then however many fish were notched versus not. There's a calculation that goes into telling you kind of the population estimate and how confident you can be in your estimate at all of those sites. But this is just a quick summary of all the fish that we got. You don't need to know, but we got just under 5,000 in the summer of 2021, mostly brown trout, brook trout, and sculpin. And then similarly, in the spring of 2021, we also did an electrofishing survey kind of at the time where Arctic grayling would be spawning or emerging. So we wanted to do this just to make sure that those communities didn't look different between the fall and the spring, just to make sure that those really small Arctic grayling had a good shot at growing up. Yes. Sculpin are really tricky to catch as well. They don't have a swim bladder, so they just kind of roll on the bottom of the stream. So there's probably more, but they're really small compared to a lot of the trout, right? So, and that's not too surprising. That's pretty typical for a cold water stream. You're going to have 70, 80% of your catch is going to be brook trout, brown trout, and then sculpin. Yeah, a big, like a trophy master angler sculpin's only about this big, and they're brown and black modeling on them makes them really hard to see. So if you do catch one, they're pretty cool, but yeah, they're hard to see. So what did the fish assemblage look like in the Boardman Ottaway River? I've got this bar graph here. Let's see, gray is our brown trout and blue is our brook trout. So we were looking for areas for the blue bars to be high and the gray bars to be low. This dotted line here on the bottom was the metric that Montana used for kind of where brown trout levels should be. I will say that their rivers are a little bit different than ours. They're typically a lot larger, so our densities in our streams are typically a lot higher than what you'd see out there just because of how much water is out there in the rivers that they do have. But we just needed kind of a benchmark to start our work. So we identified a couple areas where Arctic grayling could succeed. The North Branch upper and lower sites, so these far two, and then Jackson Creek. And then we also interested in Carpenter and 22 Creek since there were areas where brook trout were still heavily dominant over brown trout. I'll show you guys how that looks like on the map here and all together. So these are some of the areas where the water temperatures were just a little bit warm. Habitat was favorable throughout the watershed. And then brown trout were really kind of the Achilles heel in the Boardman, Ottaway, at least in the tributaries. So I kind of have the size of the brown trout, which kind of represents how dense they were in those areas. And then the brook trout here are shown in gray. So brook trout were also dominant in like the only species observed in like Jackson Creek. But then really the best habitat and water temperatures and then connectivity to the main stem. The North Branch was kind of the spot that we identified as having the best area. And you can also see there that there's a large, connected area of stream too, which is important for those grayling to be able to move around and find the habitat that they need as well once they're a little bit bigger. As Alex and mentioned earlier, habitat, water temperature, and fish community are all favorable. We kind of found those areas. High brown trout densities were a little bit of the issue there, but the best areas for grayling, as I mentioned, North Branch, 22 Creek, and Carpenter Creek. thankfully, this past, just a couple weeks ago, we were able to get some eggs. This is a picture of some of the eggs that Grand Traverse Band was able to receive. It's a little bit dark, but as Alex kind of mentioned, those little alien-looking eyes looking back at you are all successfully, spawned fish and that are fertilized and ready to get out of their eggs. The DNR had just over 400,000 eggs for the tribes to put into streams, and that looks a little bit different from tribe to tribe, which is good as well. The next slide explains that a little bit. So GTB is a little bit different in the fact that we were able to apply for a grant to put together this streamside rearing facility focused on native species. So right now that means Arctic grayling and lake sturgeon. This was through a grant that was funded through the BIA and the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. This is what it looks like on the inside. So we have river water that's coming in that gets filtered and gets put into all these tanks. Each tank is independent from the next one, so you don't spread disease from one tank to the other. But this essentially allows you a safe environment for all these fish to grow up, and you can feed them as much as they'll eat, make sure that the disease is low, and make sure that that they're not fighting each other over too much food. It's portable, so we could kind of drive this trailer and park it anywhere there's power, and we can connect the pumps to the trailer. And then it also allows for recirculation. So if you can see here on the back, those fish tanks that are on top of our normal round tanks there, those are where all of our Arctic grayling went. So instead of doing the RSIs in stream, GTB decided to go a similar direction, just a little bit different. So what we're doing is we're trucking in water from the North Branch, since that imprinting is really important. So we've got water from that specific site that we're recirculating all those Arctic grayling on, so that they're still imprinting, but they're able to do so in a very controlled environment where they're getting food 18 hours a day, which is really exciting. So that just is going to maximize their growth. Let's see. We did a similar thing last year just with lake sturgeon, and currently we have just under 1,000 lake sturgeon in the trailer. So this is just a quick picture. These are some of the larval sturgeon we got from drift about 2 weeks ago, and then in 2 months, this is a picture of the fish that we stocked out in the Boardman last year. We had 880 odd sturgeon that were reintroduced to the Boardman River for the first time in over 100 years. So that was a really awesome thing to be a part of. And then yeah, absolutely. And then we're hoping to do the same thing here with Arctic grayling. So this kind of blurry picture here is our Arctic grayling, and you can see all the orange hue. That's they're eating little brine shrimp, which are bright orange, so that's kind of what they look like when they start eating those. But by the end of the summer here, we're hoping to get the Arctic grayling to a size similar to this. And what this might allow us to do is put special tracking devices in them, so we can kind of measure how far they're moving, where they're moving to, and try to get at the why they're moving and track their movements. And I guess that kind of dovetails into some of the other efforts, which I'm sure Alex and Archie will love to touch on too, of kind of what's next now that these fish are in the stream in Little River and Little Traverse's case, and then kind of what we're going to do once we stock out as far as GTB goes. But yeah, so all the tribes are collaborating on the next steps. There's going to be a lot of post-stock monitoring. A lot of the efforts in the past 3-4 introductions were shovel-ready projects where you had fish in buckets, toss them in the stream, and good luck, fish. That's what you're going to do. But the tribes are really going to work hard to put together a really solid game plan of trying to figure out where these fish are going, how big they're getting, and answer all those questions. So I think that wraps up most of what I have, but I think we'll open it up to questions for all three of the presenters, and you guys have been an awesome audience, and really looking forward to the discussion.
We'll pull up the last slide for next steps, and then
Yep.
kind of go over some of the things that Little River thinks about doing as we
When we get to question and answer, you can shout out your questions. I'm going to repeat the question into the microphone, which will help people who are watching at home, and let you guys answer.
So I prepared this slide for next steps, but I mean, it's a adaptive process. We're always open to suggestions, taking into account all the needs of the partners and what they'd like to see done. I'd say the big one is that we're going to continue stocking eggs year after year as long as the brood stock allow for it. And of course, once these fish get to a reasonable size, it'll be more realistic to look into dispersal of the larval Arctic grayling, juvenile Arctic grayling, and also hone in on their migration as they get into adulthood, try and figure out how they move throughout these watersheds. That work will probably be mostly kicked off by electrofishing surveys. I'm really excited for that first time we go out and actually recapture an Arctic grayling. Or I guess it won't be a recapture because it hasn't really been captured before. But and then, as Nick mentioned, once they get fairly large, they'll be able to get a pit tag, which is a relatively large or small tag. It's the same technology that they put in like the back of the neck of the cats and dogs, so you can individually identify them. And then once they get to adult life stages, we'll probably be able to use acoustic telemetry to really hone in on their movement patterns. And one thing I'd like to move towards doing is making some kind of voluntary catch reporting system. So if somebody catches a grayling in the Manistee River, they can email me or give me a call with as much detail as they're willing to give. I'm not going to steal their fishing spots. I just really want to know where these grayling are moving around to. And hopefully at some point down the road, we'll be able to go out and see spawning Arctic grayling in the wild. So yeah, we have a big meeting about this Thursday with all the partners involved, just kind of continuing to hone in on this, process moving forward of how we're going to monitor the success of things. You guys have anything else or questions? Yep.
Which Maple River?
The question was which Maple River?
That's Little Traverse.
Yeah.
So
It's in Emmett County,
Yeah.
but near the dam site in,
Not the one by Gratiot County.
no.
Yeah.
Sorry.
that's perfect.
I know it's up there somewhere.
Yeah.
Yep.
When you hope, I guess is the best way to put it, start catching, a year from now, 3 years from now?
Our efforts with the Little River Band, we're kind of holding off until the fall, just so, we don't want to stress out these young Arctic grayling too much. I think once we get into September, October is when they'll probably be big enough that we can electrofish for them, and the stress of that handling won't be too much for them. Oh, for fishing?
For fishing fish?
I think next spring, if I had to guess.
Yeah, potentially. Next year.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, repeat the question.
Oh, yeah.
We had a question about the lifespan of Arctic grayling.
It's around?
So it does vary. Different populations in like Montana or Alaska, they're a little bit different, but anywhere from like 8 to 12 years is kind of like a long-lived Arctic grayling. I'm not sure what year they are in the hatchery for the broodstock program. I think they're 4, 5, 6 years along.
Six
So,
now.
and those are producing eggs. So that we'd imagine they're still going to be doing that in the hatchery setting for another, 3, 4, 5 years or more. We hope. So yeah, I guess that's probably a long answer to your short question, but okay.
We'll do this.
Oh, okay. 2 questions. First one is there a public education program planned for anglers regarding all the work that you've done? And then the second question is, in the areas where you are rearing them, is Didymo a problem?
In the North Branch of the Manistee, we have not had a problem with Didymo yet. From what I've heard and seen, it's mostly been in the main stem, but I'm not sure exactly where in the main stem. And in terms of like angler outreach stuff, we've done our best to engage that community as much as possible when we can. I guess it was 2 springs ago, we had a booth at the Midwest Fly Fishing Expo and got a lot of good feedback and support there.
I'd also say the Michigan Arctic Grayling Initiative website is a great place to get information and on what's been going on. So.
As far as Didimo and the Boardman, I think there was some reported 2 years ago, but then, and this happened to a couple other systems as well. Actually, one of my advisor's colleagues was looking into it, and the next year they went back to those same locations and it was just gone. So, you know, that's good news and bad news. So it's like, where is it going? You know, how did it get there? Where is it now? But definitely a thing that people are keeping an eye out for. So, good question.
I don't think there's any state regulations on fishing grayling right now. Is there any discussion on the DNR promulgating regulations?
Yeah, so it's actually funny. The DNR, once they had all the brood stock, which was in the hatchery up in Odin. They had too many. They were doing too well of a job at taking care of them. So they had these extra fish. They ended up stocking them in 3 lakes. They stocked them, and then they realized they didn't have any regulations. So they quick made an amendment and said Arctic grayling are catch and immediate release only. So no keep right now. They didn't specify, you know, artificial or flies only at this time, but you know, I can't speak for what kind of regulations they might have, but I think that's definitely something that's going to be, you know, in the next year about.
Right. Previously, there was no targeting of Arctic grayling, so the state of Michigan had to change the rules to actually allow for catch and immediate release. The plan is to develop a fishery for these fish and have some sort of regulations depending on what level of recruitment and that we have as we move forward.
I can talk loud, it's fine. Following up on that, is the DNR also contemplating adjusting the brown trout fishing regulation for the reintroduction areas to try and manage that population of predator?
No. You know, see, that would be a logical way to go. But the thing is when you're managing, you know, stocks for, you know, might have, you know, I'm just making the numbers here. 50% of the people in Michigan love brown trout. They're their favorite fish to catch. 50% say, oh, we want Arctic grayling. So you have to kind of, you know, manage for both of those voices that are being, you know, one may be louder than the other. But that's kind of why we're focusing our current reintroduction efforts on areas where brook trout are dominant, brown trout densities are low, so they don't have to fight that battle quite yet. So, you know, if all of these reintroduction efforts really, you know, take off as we hope they will, that might be something that really comes to the table when you're looking at how to manage different sections of stream. But, you know, that is a very logical question, and seems like it would be, yeah.
Actually, additionally, when the partnership was formed, that was one of the conditions that was brought forward, is that Arctic grayling reintroductions would not affect brown trout or your brook trout or your other salmonid species in the areas that we're looking at.
You mentioned the Emmett County Maple River as being a. Oh, okay. You mentioned the Emmett County Maple River as being one of the sites in one of your slides, but you didn't talk about it. Can you explain what you're doing in that river in particular?
That's all a different tribe. So that's Little Traverse. I don't remember their entire name, but they focused on that. So we focused on the Manistee and then the Boardman. So they can speak to it way better than we can.
Yeah, it's being done very similar to what we've presented here. They did all the same background information, you know, research, looking at the stream, fish community, habitat, all that stuff. And they did the introduction similar like we did, just up there. And I don't know if they weren't able to make it to this meeting or not.
Thanks. Curious, if the repopulation is successful, what impacts are going to be seen in the larger ecosystems?
That's a tough one. I guess we don't really know what the impacts could be. We'll figure things out as time goes on. That's one of the main reasons why I wanted to start building these long-term data sets in terms of like the fish community to look for potential changes down the road. I know anecdotally that the prey base in the North Branch Manistee River is very strong. There's a very strong insect community there. So I would imagine there's still going to be enough food for Arctic grayling, enough food for brook trout, but time will tell.
To add to that, I think Nicole Watson, who did her dissertation on that at MSU, was doing feeding trials and was noticing that, and this has also been observed in the wild too, that Arctic grayling seem to occupy kind of right dead center in the stream, whereas brook trout and brown trout kind of are, oriented more to cover. So that might be, they might change, the fish might change and adapt to wherever the food is coming, but brook trout and grayling are coexist well in, Montana and other places as well. So.
Since we're at the Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy, I've got to bring up the Upper Manistee Headwaters property. Do you envision any use for the Upper Manistee Headwater area, either the lake or this new property, this Perch Lake, or any of the feeder streams that come out of there?
I can address that. I was just shown that property map here just before the meeting, and that is directly upstream from where we have been doing these reintroductions. I don't think we've surveyed that area. I think it was private property before. Most of the work we've been doing has been on public lands. So there is a potential that could be another reintroduction site if we get access up there to look at the stream system. Oh, I'm getting my steps in today.
Here you are, Andy. Archie. Given these are salmonids, do they run, these fish? Do they run down to the East Bay or West Bay areas, or they generally stay in the upper rivers where they're got the gravel, right?
Yeah, so they are similar to brook and brown trout. I guess brook and brown trout also do, there's coastal brook trout, and then there's also lakefront brown trout, but they can complete all their life cycle in the stream, so they wouldn't likely be going out of the main stem. And then in the case of the north branch, actually the north branch of both the Manistee and the Boardman, as of right now, there's no way for them to get out, to the large body of waters, like, Lake Michigan at this point. The Boardman, fish pass is going to be a thing, coming up here soon, that bi-directional passage for fish. But we don't anticipate the grayling to be moving down that area. They should have everything they need kind of right at hand in the main stem and in the tributaries of those rivers.
Are there any other plans like in the UP? The UP seems like it'd be a really ideal colder stream area to introduce these.
Yeah, there's a lot of brook trout in the UP, but right now the initiative is focused on areas where Arctic grayling were historically observed. So that was the majority of the streams in the tip of the Mitt area, and then there was the Otter Creek in the UP as well. But I don't think the Otter Creek was nominated, right, for reintroduction?
No, I don't think the Otter Creek.
Okay, yeah.
And there's debate over whether the Otter Creek was a historic grayling stream or not, or an introduction at some point in time.
When the Brownbridge Dam let out, it really changed our fishery there. And I live on the river right down less than a mile from where Carpenter Creek enters. So I've spent 33 years out there, and it's really changed a lot. I thought when I heard about this initiative of grayling, we've got the perfect spot for them. We have tons of gravel. The water temperatures used to, because of the hydraulics of the pond, the river was swimmable, used to be swimmable in the summertime, and it would get into the mid-60s. Now we're pretty stable at 54 to 59, maybe 60 degrees. I love the idea of having the grayling in the river, and I feel that Trout Unlimited, I would love to see them get involved. I don't know if you've had conversation with them. But the river and the fishery has really changed a lot since that came about when the dam let out. We've seen a whole generation of insects wiped out because of the estuary muck and everything, where those insects were bred. And so, things have really changed. My question is, in that Carpenter Creek area, and I know you're right now you're brooding in the North Branch area. Are you going to bring a station to that area at some point in time?
Specifically for GTB, that's
Yes.
one of the other candidate sections. It might come down to the feasibility of trucking water back and forth. For this season, we just stuck with the North Branch because of the number of eggs we got. And also, if we had to if we had to try to run 2 sites at the same time, it'd be double the work, which our staff can't handle at the moment. But in the future, we may, expand to other locations, including, in addition to the North Branch. But that's going to kind of play out in how well they do, too. Yep.
Anyone else? Yeah, let me get you.
Have you had any reports or any feedback on catch rates or fishing success for the aged-out grayling that have been released into both the UP and the Lower Peninsula lakes?
We got reports of catches in Pine Lake within days of them being put in there. And then that really just tapered off, I guess, relatively quickly. I know Archie's tried a bunch of times and hasn't had any luck.
Yeah, me and my son have been to Pine Lake a few times, and we have not been successful yet. What's that? I haven't heard of anything from there. I haven't been up there.
How many years in the grand scheme of things might you think it would take to establish a self-maintaining population? Just a ballpark.
So far, based on the brood stock that's in the hatchery in Marquette, it seems like they begin to reach reproductive age after 3 to 5 years. So the earliest we might see adult fish coming back to spawn is in 3 years or so. But it's only going to get better as we continue to stock eggs into the future. So each year we're building up this potential adult population that can come back to spawn. And at the hatchery in Marquette, they're crossing females and males from different years to build up the genetic diversity. So I would imagine things will really take off after 5 years, hopefully. But the earliest we could see them come back to spawn is 3 years.
And a follow-up, if I could. That would this technology be required all the interim years in order to keep maintaining that momentum or would it taper off at some point? You put less and less eggs in because they're putting in more and more of their own?
I think as long as we're getting spawning brood stock, we'll continue to use the incubators, if that answers your question.
And then one more. That in-stream setup that you pictured it through there, how many cycles out of that do you get?
I have one here. It'll last indefinitely. Like once we deploy them, we can leave them and they're very low maintenance for weeks on end. As long as we have relatively stable water levels in the river, they can go indefinitely. And
I'm just thinking winter conditions as much as anything on that equipment.
Oh,
we deploy them.
goes in and comes out.
Yeah.
All of that comes in and out every year.
Yep.
Yep.
That's a lot of work.
It is. It's a little bit of work. Yeah, I think each one of these we did had roughly 110 feet of 2-inch PVC going upstream. So, yeah, it's a little bit of work.
Add that to your show. Let us know that.
But yeah, this is the design. It's really simple. The Montana ones were mostly just 5-gallon buckets, and we decided to size them up a little bit in anticipation of even getting more eggs from the brood stock in the future. So this design holds about 20,000 eggs, and then I have a 54-gallon one that holds about 45,000 eggs. Yeah, they each require that 2-inch conduit to be run upstream to get enough head pressure that you essentially create a siphon where water comes in through the bottom and out through the top.
Getting all of that set in place and have it stable for a whole season.
Yep. Yeah, and this year.
Yeah, but the season's really only a few weeks.
2 weeks.
By the time we get the eggs, they're hatched out, and it was like 3 weeks in a row we got eggs. So really, we're looking at maybe a month and a half or so of actually having this equipment in the streams.
Maintaining a permanent site in
No, not permanent. These are all based on the best fit for these, where we can get flow, and river systems change year to year. So we go back and we'll kind of pick areas based on what we feel is the best place for placement.
Yeah, we did deal with changing conditions this year because I put them out early to make sure everything was working properly. And of course, I started off before there were leaves on the trees. There was still some snow melt up in the Upper Manistee. So water levels dropped significantly over the last few weeks, and they've still been operating really well.
Any more questions? Okay, well, thank you all for coming out tonight. Appreciate it.
People probably stick around. Thank you so much. That was really
Thank you.
great. Really great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey.
I live on the north branch of the Manistee.
Oh, really?
And I just wondered, do you ever need or use volunteer help for any phase of your operations?
I worked with one guy that lives close to the North Branch, and he ended up going up and checking on the RSIs for me this season. Just the big thing for me is I want to make sure water's flowing through there. So having a local contact that might be able to report back to me on like a Saturday and say, hey, you got flow, that's a big thing for me because I can't make it up there on the weekends to check on them and stuff. So if that's something you'd be willing to do, I can get your contact information. Okay. And there'd be no pressure. I mean, you don't have to do it every day if you've got a vacation planned or something. But if you live close by and next year you want to come see the eggs in the incubators, I'd gladly accommodate that.
I'd be real interested in that. I live on the, probably third of a mile up where the North Branch runs into the main river.
Okay.
It's Sharon.
Yeah, okay.
But there aren't a lot of people that live on the North Branch.
No, there's not. Yeah.
And I'm fairly familiar with the river.
Oh, good.
So I'd be interested in helping in any way I could.
I usually have a card on me, but I'll just send myself an email with your phone number and name, and then I'll have it in the office when I go there tomorrow, if that's okay with you.
Okay, sure.
See, I'll email myself here. What's your name?
Okay, it's Mark, M-A-R-K, Maddox, M-A-D-D-O-X.
Okay.
And my email is ss, as if my wife, Sarah Sutton, it's ss8218 at gmail.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah, thank you.
all right.
I sent that to myself, so I'll have it tomorrow, and I'll reach out to you.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Good to meet you. Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, gotcha. Yeah. I wish I could speak more to their system, but they're all so different. Like, I know the Manistee, and that's about it. Yep. Mhm. Yep. We don't know yet. Remains to be seen. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's just a different way of doing things. Like the Grand Traverse folks, they can grow them out through the summer and get them to a larger size and then release them. Ours are going out as fry, so very early life stage where there's probably going to be quite a bit of predation, but it's all just a numbers game.
Well, I did my math